Sam Nunberg was one of Mr. Trump's first political consultants. He's also one of the few people who knows what it's like to be hired and fired by the president on multiple occasions. It's an honor of sorts, I guess, Sam.
Sure.
I want to talk about the Jekyll and Hyde presidency. Donald Trump today was on a teleprompter. He was saying the things that people wanted to hear from him. Last night, though, he kept going off the teleprompter. He was attacking everybody in sight. How does he have credibility today when he had a night like last night?
You know, I was thinking during your intro, and if you compare him even to Monday night, where it's only his second address as president of the United States, the first one was for Neil Gorsuch. Here he's talking about the Afghanistan troop surge. He wants to appeal as commander-in-chief. He goes into a rally paid by his campaign, which he declared he's running for re-election the day after he swore in, I believe. And those are those rallies, as you were there when you were...
Hold on. You can't say, today I'm going to be president, and today I'm going to be a candidate. That doesn't work that way.
Well, he's got to adapt. You know, I've spoken to him. Everybody's told him he should adapt.
Yeah, no, I know everyone's told him he should adapt.
But
He should pivot. He should pivot during the election too. He's never done that. Why would there be any expectation that he's going to adapt?
There probably shouldn't be. Look, he got where he is, acting the way he is, and he feels that that's a formula that works for him. And until it's proven that it doesn't, even then, at that point, he's going to go out the way he wants to.
Sam, is he a president or is he a candidate?
Last night he was a candidate, that's for sure. Last night he's campaigning. Is
it okay to switch between the two?
Occasionally, yes, it is. I mean, look, Barack Obama, I remember in his first year before the midterms, he used to try to hold these rallies as well. But when he's making comments that I think, whether or not we agree with him, whether or not the base agrees with him, but to target, you know, if you want to talk about Senator McCain, Senator Flake, if you're in Arizona, that's not going to help get the agenda passed. And if they can't provide deliverables, whether it's the Republicans in Congress or it's him, they're going to have major problems at the election.
That may be that you think that you can do one and then do the other, but let's be honest. He last night went after two Republican senators.
Right.
He went after the system of government that forces compromise, which very few people, I think, would like to see go in this country. And then he went after those in the press saying that we don't love this country, which is just completely absurd, saying that we are stoking the fires of racism and hatred in this country. Given that, how does any of that unite this country?
Well, that's a good question. He was elected under strange circumstances, even though he had a humongous electoral win. It was a very contentious election. And he doesn't, unfortunately, whether you can talk to him or not, he doesn't take criticism well.
No.
And even if you look at that press conference, that problematic press conference in Trump Tower, the question kicked off where he gives this inarticulate answer is because he was put on the defensive.
Yeah.
And sometimes he's just able not to get over things. I have that same problem too, unfortunately, but he just can't.
Sam, respectfully, you're not the president.
Exactly. But he just can't get over certain things where whether it's right or wrong. And he sometimes, it hurts him and it hurts his agenda. And the problem is that it's not going to help if they cannot get deliverables for the voters.
Yeah.
They will suffer at the ballot box. Now, they may not suffer
do
as much.
Do they believe that Donald Trump can go out and he can blame everybody but himself and still maintain his base?
You know, with some of the base, it works like that. Polling has shown, if you look at some of these public
polling,
polling,
that it doesn't matter what goes on, as if he doesn't get anything done, then it's Congress's fault?
I think
and on and on?
No, at the end of the day, you know, he was elected certainly he was elected as an outside personality. He's a unique person. But if you can't deliver the goods, if there's a line like that in Art of the Deal, nobody can win. And you're not, and the voters will give you, you know, they will punish you for it.
So do you think the voters are going to turn against Trump at some point if he can't get anything passed?
Well, it's way too early to know that. I think that if the election were held today, it'd be very problematic for Republicans. I don't see how it wouldn't be. On the other hand, the way it's made up in the country is a larger, more esoteric conversation we can go into. I don't think that they would be hurt as much at the ballot box as opposed to Democrats, just because of the, you know, gerrymandering, things like that.
Is anybody in the White House telling this to the president? And if so, is he going to listen to anybody? Is there anybody that can get through to him?
Well, the president is going to listen to all advice. The president will hear you out as long as it's done respectfully and constructively. Everybody's asked me that. But he's going to do what he wants to do. It's his decision. Now, he's president of the United States. Normally, you know, I've worked for other people that are very powerful positions, and they're still going to do what they want to do. But I think that sometimes he doesn't understand, or it's not told him, that saying something like this does not help you in the Senate. Mitch McConnell is almost as powerful as the President of the United States on Capitol Hill. And that's the reality, whether you like it or not. He controls an agenda.
It's an equal branch of government.
Correct. And one of the president's greatest achievements is directly because of Mitch McConnell, which is Neil Gorsuch.
Sam, so this begs the question. Does he want to be the president? Does he want to lead this country? Does he want to get things done for people? Or does he just want to exact revenge on his rivals?
Well, he wants, look, I was with him early on, and I was with him from 2011 to 2015. And Katie, as you would know, it wasn't helpful to his career in the public sector to go acting like a conservative, to start doing this messaging, go to these conservative rallies and things like that he did. He is worried about the direction of the country. The problem is, and it is a problem, I'm sorry, Mr. President, is that you can go in to get big changes done in Washington, but there's certain ways you cannot change the way Washington operates, and it's not constructive or productive.
So what does he really believe in?
Well, the president believes in taking care of the veteran. I mean, you want to go over the policies. He believes in taking care of the veterans, securing the border, readjusting, bringing health care reform in our view. He wants to bring tax reform.
He doesn't really understand health care reform whatsoever.
He does understand that it needs to be fixed. Obamacare is as we would call it, Obamacare.
The Senate
premiums
plan
are rising.
and the House plan would lose millions of people. Millions of people would lose their coverage. He campaigned on making sure that everybody would be covered. How that doesn't square. It just seemed at the end of that healthcare debate, he just wanted to notch a win in his corner.
The Republican view is we're concerned about rising premiums.
But is
premiums
Donald Trump
continue to rise. He's an independent president. That's for sure. He could have run as an independent third-party candidate. He ran in a very contested primary, 17 candidates, and he was able to go on a message which had Democrat elements in it. It had independent elements, had Ross Perot elements in it. And that's
Sam,
one of the reasons.
What was that message you had for the president?
What was the message?
Yeah.
The message was to be like Democrats, union members on trade. The message was to be anti-government cronyism.
Learn how government works.
Well, to operate the government as a business. And that's, something I was talking about somebody today. One of the major problems we'll look back in this first year is the transition. They didn't really concentrate on the transition until after they won the election. It was something that's had a lot of problems. And then they started out and they agreed to this Paul Ryan plan of going after Obamacare first. Imagine if they had started with infrastructure. And this is hindsight 2020.
Yeah.
It would have been much different. It would have put the Democrats on defense there.
I think you and I had that conversation a number of times.
Maybe you were the one who gave me the idea.
Maybe.
I don't know.
I just was curious. Sam Nunberg, thank you so much for coming in and talking to us. We always appreciate it.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.